Outside, the river murmured its endless song, a soft, ceaseless current that had measured the passing hours and the turning seasons, unbroken through storms and sunlit days alike. The millstones rested in patient silence, their cool surfaces smooth beneath the breath of the night. The building itself seemed alive, creaking quietly as the timber sighed with the weight of memory, the labor and longing woven into every knot and grain. Beyond the far bank, the fields lay cloaked in darkness, the hedgerows etching faint, ghostly lines under the watchful eye of the moon. Somewhere upstream, a stray branch, loosened by the current, brushed gently against the mill's great wheel, a soft knock that seemed almost like a reminder. The world was waiting, always waiting, for dawn to rise, for the wheel to turn again, and for the day's long labor to begin anew. In this quiet moment between night and morning, the mill held its breath, a silent guardian standing watch over the fragile hope of a new day. And as the stars faded one by one into the soft light of dawn, the wheel would awaken, turning slowly to greet the hours that had yet to come. At the forest's edge, a lantern swung gently in the night breeze, its flickering light a fragile tether between this dark, untamed silence and the careful order of the abbey's stone halls. The flame wavered, casting dancing shadows that reached out like fingers, as if hesitant to cross the boundary between the world of men and the deep, ancient wild. Here, at this threshold, the night held its breath, a moment suspended between what was remembered and what was forgotten, between the whisper of the past and the quiet steps of those who would come again. The forest waited, patient and watchful, as though guarding secrets too heavy for words, and as the lantern's glow faded into the darkness, one could almost believe the wild heart of the woods beat in time with the flickering flame, fragile, enduring, and alive. The mill stood silent on the river's edge, a steadfast sentinel in the moonlight, its great will paused like a giant's breath held in stillness. The water slipped softly around its wooden supports, whispering secrets of wet earth and crushed grain, carrying the quiet rhythm of life that had pulsed here for generations. The night was thick with the scent of flower dust, pale and lingering, settling on the worn beams and heavy sacks stacked in the shadows. Through the narrow cracks in the shutters, moonlight spilled like silver ribbons across the rough-hewn floor, folding light and shadow into a fragile tapestry. A single lantern hung from a rusted hook, its flame small but steady, a warm gold circle in the cool hush. On the workbench beneath it lay the tools of the miller's craft, a wooden scoop scarred from years of use, a ledger thick with faded ink and ledger lines, and a half-drunk jug of ale, its surface catching the flicker of the flame like a distant star. The forest pressed close against the abbey's stone walls, a living shadow older than the road that wound its way through the village, older even than the fortress stones themselves. Tonight, it loomed like a dark, unyielding wall against the deep black of the sky, the air thick and heavy with the rich scent of damp leaves and smoldering wood smoke. The breath of the earth rose in soft waves beneath the towering trunks, where moss clung like faded velvet and roots twisted deep into the soil, unseen but alive. A narrow path slipped quietly through the undergrowth, weaving past gnarled branches and thick brambles toward a small shrine, half hidden beneath a veil of moss and creeping ivy. The shrine's stone figure, worn smooth by centuries of wind, rain, and human touch, stood silent, its features softened, almost erased, as if time itself sought to forget the face it once bore. At its base, small offerings lay scattered, sprigs of rosemary, their scent sharp and green, a handful of coins, dull and tarnished by the years, a crust of bread, hard and dry, left perhaps by a traveler seeking a moment's grace on a long, uncertain road. Above, the leaves whispered in a language older than any living tongue, their soft rustling a secret conversation between wind and wood. From deep within the forest came the clear, sure call of an owl, low and haunting, cutting through the stillness like a solitary prayer. The voice seemed to carry the weight of forgotten nights, the long watchfulness of a silent guardian. The shrine's cold stone held an unexpected warmth, a pulse beneath its weathered surface, the warmth of memory, devotion, and quiet faith. It was a place kept alive not by grand gestures but by small acts of reverence, a leaf laid down, a whispered hope, the passing touch of a finger tracing the outline of a forgotten face. Each offering a thread, weaving the wild forest and the ordered abbey together in a fragile bond. A quill moved steadily across parchment, its delicate tip drawing words with care, each stroke soaking deep into the fibers as though weaving a spell. The scribe's hand was steady, his posture rigid and reverent, as if the very act of writing was a prayer, a tether to hold the fleeting night in place. His eyes never rose from the page, his breath came slow and measured, a quiet rhythm that joined the ancient heartbeat of this place. Through the high windows, the pale wash of moonlight slipped in, outlining the carved saints whose faces seemed caught between mercy and sorrow. Dust floated in the cold air, each mote turning silver for a moment before disappearing back into the darkness. Somewhere beyond the cloister walls, rain had ceased, leaving the earth soaked and fragrant, a rich scent of wet stone and moss. Water dripped faintly in the distance, falling in slow, irregular drops that echoed like a metronome through the hush. The scribe's ink darkened the parchment, words flowing like a river through the quiet night, stories of faith and fear, hope and betrayal, survival and sacrifice. He wrote to remember, to preserve, as though his careful script could anchor the night to the earth, preventing it from slipping away into the vast, cold dark beyond these ancient walls. In the flickering candlelight, the shadows seemed to breathe, shifting like the ghosts of forgotten prayers. The room held its secrets close, stories whispered between stone and silence, waiting for a voice to carry them forward. Outside, the world lay wrapped in darkness, but within this chamber, a fragile flame burned on. And as the quill traced its path across the page, the scribe became a silent guardian of memory, his work a quiet rebellion against the erasure of time. When the last drop fell and the candle guttered low, the words remained, a fragile beacon, a whisper of light in the endless night. Around him, the sheep shuffled toward the fold, their thick wool catching the moonlight, glowing like pale clouds pressed close to the earth. Their breath rose in small white puffs, fleeting as smoke, while the chill seeped into the bones of the land itself. The shepherd's eyes lifted toward the hilltop where the city lay below like a scattering of dying embers, windows flickering with warm lantern light, the distant flare of a tavern's fire spilling soft orange into the night, and the faint shimmer of stained glass from the church catching the moon's cold gaze. The river's song threaded quietly beneath it all, a constant murmur too low for words, a gentle reminder that life moved onward even in this hushed hour. Above, a single star broke free from the clouds, sharp and bright like a blade against the velvet darkness. The shepherd paused, leaning heavily on his staff, his breath held as he watched that distant light. Somewhere deep inside, a memory stirred, a voice, a face, a night much like this one, long ago and buried beneath years of silence. The sheep huddled close together, ignorant of the storm of thoughts passing through the man who guarded them. Around him, the cold pressed in, the earth and sky locked in quiet conversation, and the faint pulse of a world both ancient and fragile. In the stillness of this silver night, the shepherd stood alone, a lone witness to the past whispering through the frost, holding fast to the fragile threads of memory as the dark slowly deepened. The chapter house lay deep within the abbey's stone heart, a cavern of shadow and silence that held centuries of breath beneath its vaulted ceiling. Tonight, the darkness was almost complete, broken only by a single candle flickering on a heavy wooden desk at the room's center. Its trembling flame cast long, wavering shadows that climbed the cold columns like silent pilgrims seeking solace in the stillness. Outside, the night pressed harder against the thick stone, a cold breath that seeped through cracks and crevices. The abbey was sealed tight, a fortress of faith against a world often cruel and uncertain. Here, in this dim sanctuary, the brother sought refuge not only in the words on the page but in the enduring spirit they carried, a flame that no darkness could fully extinguish. He leaned closer to the open book, tracing the ancient script with reverence, each letter a tether to a time when hope was fragile and faith was fierce. The sparrow in the margin was more than a mere doodle, it was a symbol, small, unassuming, yet filled with quiet strength. Like the bird, the abbey endured, perched on the edge of night, ready to rise with the dawn. And so, as the oil lamps flickered and the cold wind whispered through the abbey's bones, the brother remained still, a silent witness to the stories kept alive by ink and prayer, waiting for the coming light to carry them forward. The fields beyond the city gates stretched wide and silent, bathed in the pale silver light of the moon's long, cold touch. The furrows, etched deep into the earth, shimmered faintly with frost, each ridge and hollow catching the night like fragile glass. The breath of the land rose in soft tendrils of mist, curling low along the ground, drifting from the ditches and tangled hedgerows as if the earth exhaled quietly beneath the weight of night. A solitary shepherd moved slowly at the edge of the pasture, his thick cloak pulled tight against the biting cold. His steps were steady and deliberate, the wooden crook in his hand tapping gently against the frost-hardened soil with each measured stride. The faint chime of sheep bells floated softly through the still air, each note a delicate accident of movement, together weaving an unintentional lullaby that hummed beneath the vast silence. A young brother moved silently between the aisles, his sandals barely a whisper on the cold flagstones. His fingers traced the carved titles etched into the wooden shelves as if trying to awaken the voices trapped within those fragile pages. The wind beyond the thick stone walls rattled the shutters, a quiet reminder of the cold night pressing close, restless and unyielding. Somewhere far below, the heavy clang of the portcullis being lowered echoed upward, sealing the abbey in a cocoon of shadow and silence until dawn. In the dim corner of the library, a single book lay open upon a worn lectern. Its illuminated letters glowed faintly in the lamplight, reds and golds flickering like embers caught in the gloom. The intricate designs curled and twined around the text, a silent hymn of devotion carved in pigment and patience. A small mouse darted from the darkness, pausing near the lectern's base before slipping beneath the heavy shelves. The brothers' gaze followed, but then rested on the delicate margin where centuries past, a monk's hand had drawn a sparrow in black ink. The tiny bird's eyes, inked with careful precision, seemed to meet his own, as if to whisper that even in this vast silence, the library listened. This place was no mere storehouse of knowledge, it was a sanctuary of memory and faith. Each page held the breath of prayers, the secrets of scribes who had labored through candlelit nights, weaving their devotion into every stroke. The library was alive with shadows, shadows of the past pressing close, reminding those who dared enter that history was not dead but waiting, watching. The brother felt the weight of unseen eyes, the quiet hum of stories yearning to be told. Somewhere down a shadowed side street, a dog barked once, sharp and sudden, then fell quiet, swallowed by the stillness. Overhead, the ancient oak's branches shifted and creaked, speaking in slow, heavy whispers. They seemed to hold the secrets of countless market days, the shouts of merchants, the laughter of children, the clatter of hooves on cobbles, stories etched into wood and stone like scars of memory. The cobblestones beneath the old man still held the warmth of the day's sun, a faint heat that promised to fade with the coming frost before morning. His hands rested lightly on his knees, fingers twitching as if recalling the long-gone weight of coins, the smoothness of ripe fruit, and the rough pull of cart ropes he had known in his youth. Though time had stripped the market of its vibrant noise, the square itself hummed quietly with what had been, holding its history close, like a seashell cradles the whisper of the sea. In the stillness of this fading night, the old man's gaze softened, carrying the weight of memory and loss. The market square, empty and silent now, was more than stones and timber. It was a gathering place of hopes, bargains, dreams, and betrayals, a heart that once beat with the restless pulse of life. And though the sounds were gone, the spirit lingered, waiting, as all things do, for the dawn and the return of light. The monastery library lay hidden deep within the stone heart of the abbey, its heavy oak door bound by blackened iron standing silent guard against the restless night. Inside, 2 oil lamps cast slow-moving halos of flickering light, their flames dancing gently over shelves heavy with leather-bound tomes. Each spine bore the cracks and scars of time, the worn gold leaf faded but still whispering stories long forgotten. The air was thick with the scent of vellum and dust, underscored by the faint bitterness of ink, a perfume of centuries captured in stillness. Outside, the rain softened to a gentle drizzle, the patter now barely more than a hush on the stones. From the distant church came the faint chime of the bell, its solemn tone marking another hour passing in the night. The guild hall seemed to breathe with the scribe, an old heart beating quietly at the center of a sleeping city, holding the weight of countless stories in its patient silence. And as the night deepened, the scribe's hand began to move again, the quill scratching softly against the parchment, a quiet act of remembrance in a world that was already slipping into shadow. The market square lay silent beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak, its gnarled roots twisting deep beneath the cobblestones as if holding the very heart of the village. The stalls, once alive with color and clamor, now stood empty and still, their canvas awnings tightly bound against the chill of the coming night. The bright hues of the day had faded into muted grays and shadows, as if the square itself was slipping into a quiet sleep. The scent of smoked fish, honey cakes, and spiced wine, once carried on the warm breath of midday, had dissolved into memory. Yet now and then, the wind teased the air with a faint ghost of those forgotten aromas, drifting from some unseen corner as a reminder of life's fleeting sweetness. At the far edge of the square, an old man sat alone on a worn wooden bench. His cloak was pulled tight around his shoulders against the evening's cold, but his eyes wandered freely, tracing the shuttered windows, the locked doors, and finally resting on the fountain at the square center. There, water still trickled faintly into the stone basin, its soft murmurs the only sound in the heavy silence. The rain whispered a steady rhythm against the weathered shutters of the guild hall, each drop a soft murmur against the worn wood. Outside, lanterns swung gently in the wind, their flickering light casting brief flashes across the slick cobblestones of the empty square, like fleeting ghosts dancing in the night. The village lay quiet beneath the dark sky, wrapped in the hush of falling rain, as if holding its breath until the storm would pass. Inside the hall, the hearth glowed with a fading warmth. Embers burned low, deep red and glowing like garnet sunk into black velvet. Their slow heat spilled softly across the vast chamber, reaching out to touch the heavy wooden beams overhead and the cold stone floor beneath. Near the fire, a lone scribe sat hunched over a heavy table, his fingers unraveling a sheet of parchment yellowed with age. The faded ink sprawled across it, names, numbers, accounts of merchants long gone, each quill stroke a ghostly echo of hands that once traded, bargained, and dreamed beneath this very roof. The air carried the sharp, earthy scent of wet wool, clinging to the scribe's cloak, mingling with the cold iron tang of tools stacked near the door. Hammers rested heavy on wood, chisels glinted faintly, and the old weighing scales sat patiently, their brass catching the dying light. Somewhere deeper in the hall, the great clock ticked with steady defiance against the night's silence. Its pendulum swung slow and sure, a metronome marking the passage of hours in the stillness. Dust drifted lazily in the warm glow above the hearth, floating like ancient memories caught in a slow dance. The scribe's breath rose and fell in a quiet rhythm, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Occasionally, he paused, staring into the embers as though seeking secrets hidden within their glowing depths. Perhaps he sought the stories of the dead merchants, their hopes and losses, their whispered deals and silent betrayals, stories not found in ink but alive. Outside, frost was gathering on the cobblestones, painting the ground with a fragile, sparkling lace. The night air pressed coldly against the leaded glass of the chapel's windows, still and sharp as a blade. Beyond the chapel door, footsteps faded slowly into silence, swallowed by the stillness of the narrow lane. The world outside had slipped into quiet, but inside, the silence was alive, expectant, as if every breath, every rustle of cloth was watched by unseen eyes, remembered by the stone and wood. The woman's gaze remained fixed upon the crucifix before her, but her thoughts drifted far beyond. She imagined the small cottage waiting for her in the village, the hearth with its dying embers, the faint scent of last night's fire curling into the cold air. Tomorrow would bring the dawn and its hard demands, but for now, she was held in the fragile glow of candlelight, a small beacon of warmth against the vast darkness that stretched beyond these walls. In this quiet moment, time seemed to fold. The past and present whispered to one another across the flickering shadows. The woman's prayers were not just for herself, but for the countless souls who had knelt here before, their hopes and fears etched into the very stones. The chapel was a sanctuary, a fragile refuge in a world often cruel and cold. As she knelt, the weight of the world settled softly around her, the hunger, the longing, the quiet courage that carried her through each day. Outside, the night deepened, and the chapel stood firm, a solitary light shining against the dark sea of the world. And in that light, hope lingered, fragile, enduring, and as steady as the slow beating of a prayer whispered into the silence. Long before the abbey's stones had been laid, before the bell tower's shadow stretched over the fields, this river had been witnessed. It carried wood for building, grain for bread, and prayers in languages forgotten by time. It held the stories of hope and loss, of devotion and despair, its currents weaving the lives of those who came to its banks into a living tapestry. Tonight, the river spoke only in murmurs, its secrets held close beneath the cool moonlight. And the novice, like the world around him, was content to listen, letting the water cradle its mysteries as the night stretched on, gentle and unbroken. The chapel stood alone beyond the village, its bell tower reaching like a dark finger into the fading violet sky. The sun had slipped behind the hills, leaving only whispers of color, soft and trembling. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of incense, sweet, heavy, and almost tangible, wrapping around the worn altar cloth like a gentle veil. A single candle flickered, its flame bending low in the draughts that crept through the ancient stone walls, casting long, wavering shadows of carved saints upon the rough surfaces. Their faces seemed caught between mercy and sorrow, watching silently over the quiet space. At the front, a woman knelt on the cold stone floor. Her woolen cloak, damp from the evening mist, clung tightly to her shoulders, shielding her from the chill that crept inside. Her fingers curled around a rosary, each bead worn smooth by years of silent prayer and whispered hope. Her voice was barely a breath, rising and falling softly like the gentle rhythm of a heartbeat, a prayer offered not in words but in quiet longing. The river beside the abbey moved like liquid glass beneath the silver breath of the moon. Its surface held the faint, wavering reflection of the ancient bell tower, bending and breaking as a single drifting leaf slipped across the quiet water. The willows that lined the bank bowed low, their slender branches trailing in the current like searching fingers, restless and reaching for answers long buried beneath the flow. A young novice knelt at the water's edge, cupping the cold stream in his hands. The chill bit deep into his skin, but he did not flinch, as though the river's cold touch was a baptism of endurance. His breath rose in pale clouds that vanished almost as quickly as they came, mingling with the mist that curled softly over the river's surface. Behind him, the abbey stood silent but alive, the mingled scents of beeswax from flickering candles, hearty rye bread just finished, and the warmth of spiced ale drifted from the refectory where the brothers shared their last meal before night's embrace. The faint echo of a hymn lingered in the air, tangled like a fragile thread in the rafters above. It was a melody sung just an hour ago, yet it hung timeless, a prayer whispered not only for the living but for the souls who had passed through these walls across centuries. Somewhere beyond the reach of light and sound, a nightjar's call wove itself through the stillness, haunting, tender, a voice that seemed older than stone, older than the abbey itself. This moment, poised between breath and silence, felt like a painting brushed in shadows and silver. Every movement was deliberate, every sound softened by distance, as if time itself had slowed to watch. The novice's heart beat quietly beneath his coarse robe, steady and sure in the fragile calm. His mind drifted, touching on thoughts too soft to speak aloud, memories not his own, yet somehow familiar, the merchants who once bargained along this very riverbank, fishermen casting their nets at dawn, and the tears From far beyond the stone walls came the faint creak of cartwheels turning on damp earth, the low, gentle bleating of sheep as they settled into their pens, and the soft laughter of women drawing water from the village well. These sounds were the invisible thread stitching the present to the past, unchanged, unfaded, a chorus repeated in the lives of those who had come before. There was a comforting constancy in them, a reminder that while the world outside may twist and turn, some things hold steady like the earth beneath the feet. The air inside the abbey held a kind of expectancy, a pause between breaths, as if the entire place leaned inward, listening for something unspoken, something almost forgotten. One might imagine the stones themselves remembered, the whispered prayers of novices long vanished, the hurried footsteps of pilgrims crossing cold floors, the murmured Latin of vigils held in the dark. These echoes were woven deep into the very fabric of the walls, threading history and memory into the present moment. Tonight, those echoes seemed closer, clearer, as though the abbey was ready to speak again, not in words, but in feeling and breath, inviting any who would dare to listen. The quiet was sacred, a gentle sanctuary from the world's restless noise. It wrapped around the soul like a soft cloak, holding the weight of centuries in its stillness. In this calm, time folded softly. The hours slowed, the world outside faded into the night's embrace, and the abbey held its breath. Here, beneath the fading light and the deepening shadows, the past and present brushed fingertips, sharing stories that needed no voice. This was a place where silence sang, where every sound carried the weight of 1,000 prayers, and where peace was not just an absence but a presence, steady, enduring, and profound. The last light of day lingered like a faded blessing upon the worn cloister stones, slipping softly into the cracks where moss had patiently settled over countless years. The stones themselves seemed to sigh beneath the touch of twilight, cooling from the heat of a sun that had traveled its slow journey across the sky, now ready to rest. Beyond the ancient archways, the garden breathed a quiet perfume, rosemary sharp and clean, sage earthy and deep, and lavender faintly sweet, their leaves growing dark and heavy beneath the gentle brush of evening's breath. High above, in the stone tower that had stood sentinel through the shifting tides of centuries, the bell tolled with slow gravity. Its deep voice rolled out across the village roofs, spilling over the hills and folding into the valleys beyond. This was no urgent summons, no hurried alarm to stir restless hearts or hurried footsteps. It was the gentle marking of time, the solemn punctuation that the day's labors had come to their end, and the quiet of night was preparing to settle. Inside the abbey's scriptorium, a single monk sat bent over his parchment. The flicker of candlelight gilded the curve of his hand, danced on the rim of his ink pot, and swayed with the faint draught slipping through the narrow slit of the open window. Each stroke of his quill was a whisper of devotion, slow and deliberate, as if the very act of writing was a prayer carried on fragile wings. The scratch of the quill against parchment was a quiet melody, one that seemed to reach back through the ages, threading together moments just like this, moments when the world paused to listen.